The moment I realized Deborah was leaving me wasn't loud or dramatic. There was no screaming, no slamming of doors. It happened on a Tuesday morning, with the sun drawing thin gold lines across our kitchen floor, and the scent of burned toast clinging to the air like an accusation. She didn't say a word as she handed me the coffee mug, my favorite, chipped at the rim. I saw the way her fingers hesitated just before they let go, as if she had to remind herself to complete the gesture. She used to smile at me in the mornings, tousle my hair, kiss the corner of my mouth. Now her gaze slipped past mine, searching for something on the horizon only she could see. I tried to say something, anything. But my voice stuck, brittle as a twig, so I just watched her move around the kitchen, her back to me, her hair falling in a careful sheet over her shoulders. The space between us felt like an open wound. My phone vibrated on the table, a string of text messages lighting up the screen. I didn't need to check to know who it was. Lately, her sister Hannah's name had appeared more often than mine in Deborah's phone. I told myself it was nothing, that I was being paranoid, that sisters talked. But a seed of doubt had been planted weeks ago, and it grew roots every time Deborah disappeared for hours, every time she came home with that distracted look in her eyes. She set a stack of papers on the counter. "Sign these when you have time," she said, almost gently. The words seemed to echo in the small space, bouncing off the tile, sinking into the cracks in the floor. I looked down. Divorce papers. Her signature was already there, written in smooth, practiced cursive. There was no anger in her tone, no trace of the arguments we'd had, no lingering sadness. It was just business, like paying bills or setting out the trash. For a moment, I waited for the anger to come. I waited for the storm I thought was inside me to break. But it didn't. I felt nothing. Just a dull ache behind my eyes, as if I'd spent too long staring at a blank screen. I picked up the pen, turning it over in my hand. My thumb found the groove where the cap should have been, worrying it like a loose tooth. I wondered how it was possible for a person's whole world to end in such silence. No explosions, no tears. Just paperwork and cooling coffee. She was already halfway out the door when I spoke. "Was it ever real?" I asked, my voice sounding strange and small. She paused, her hand on the frame. She didn't turn around. "I thought it was. Once." And then she was gone. The clock ticked on, unbothered by endings. I stood there, pen in hand, looking at her signature, the emptiness blooming in my chest. I'd always imagined betrayal would burn. But as the sunlight faded from the kitchen, all I felt was numb, like I'd been hollowed out, and nothing remained but the echo of her footsteps. That was how I learned that love, when it dies, makes no sound at all. If you'd asked me, even just a year ago, what I believed about love and loyalty, I would have given you an answer as certain as gravity, that love meant staying, that loyalty was measured not by what you felt in moments of passion but by the quiet persistence to keep holding on, even when you wanted to run. I didn't arrive at that certainty by accident. My whole childhood was built on the stubborn hope that people kept their promises. I grew up in a small house on the outskirts of a northern town, where winters pressed in against the windows and the radiators rattled with protest. My mother was a nurse, working double shifts and coming home late with exhaustion tucked into the lines around her eyes. My father was a shadow in our lives, present only in the faded photographs my mother kept in a shoebox beneath her bed, and in the stories she told when she thought I was asleep. He left before I was old enough to remember, but old enough to feel the absence like a draft in the house. The story, as my mother told it, was simple: he wasn't built for staying. Some people aren't. But she always added, that's not your fault. Don't let the leaving of others teach you to leave. So I learned, young, that absence was a thing you could survive. When I asked my mother why she never remarried, she'd smile in that tired way and say, because your father taught me enough about disappointment for a lifetime. But I saw her leave a light on every night, just in case. There was faith in that gesture, a belief that someday, someone might find their way back. School was where I learned the shape of belonging. I wasn't popular, not exactly. But I had friends, Matt, who lived 2 streets over and whose parents argued so loudly you could hear them through the walls, Kira, who braided my hair in 3rd grade and cried into my shoulder when her dog died. We formed a tight circle, built on shared secrets and stolen afternoons spent by the river. There was a night, when I was 12, that has always stayed with me. My mother came home late, drenched from the rain, her shoes soaked through. She found me curled up on the couch with a blanket, pretending to read. She sat beside me, shivering, and pulled me close. "Promise me something," she whispered, her breath warm against my hair. "Anything. Promise me you'll never be the first to let go. Not in love. Not in friendship. You hold on, even when it hurts. It's better to know you did everything you could." It was a heavy promise to make, and heavier to keep. But I carried it through high school, through every test and trial. When Matt's family moved away, I wrote him letters for years, even when he never replied. When Kira stopped talking to me over some imagined slight, I kept her secrets anyway, because that's what loyalty meant to me, holding on, even in silence. College was my first taste of true independence, and also my first real heartbreak. I met a boy named Daniel in a philosophy class. He was all sharp edges and restless energy, a city transplant who seemed to know the answers to questions I'd never thought to ask. We dated for 8 months, a whirlwind of late-night debates and frantic, whispered plans for a future that never materialized. He broke up with me on a park bench in October, just as the leaves turned. "You're too much," he said, not unkindly. "You care too much. You deserve someone who gives that back." I cried for days, but even as the grief receded, I clung to my mother's promise. I told myself I would not become hard or bitter, that I would keep caring, keep believing that loyalty meant something, even if others didn't see it that way. It was during those lonely months that I first met Deborah. She was older, confident in a way I'd only ever read about, with a smile that could disarm anyone. We met at a bookstore, reaching for the same battered copy of a poetry collection. She laughed, embarrassed, and offered it to me. I insisted she take it. She bought me coffee instead. Our friendship grew quickly. Deborah had a way of making people feel seen, of drawing out secrets you didn't even know you were keeping. She told me about her family, about her younger sister Hannah, the wild one, the rebel, always in trouble but always forgiven. I envied the easy way Deborah talked about loyalty, like it was simply a matter of being present. We became inseparable. When I struggled with finals, she showed up at my apartment with soup and encouragement. When her father was hospitalized, I drove her through the night to be with him, sitting with her in those long, fluorescent-lit corridors, holding her hand while she wept. I loved her before I realized it. Not in the way you fall for someone, but in the way you realize you can't imagine your life without them. That, I thought, was the foundation of real loyalty. Not the grand gestures, but the daily presence, the willingness to be there, no matter what. Looking back, I see how much of myself I gave away. I see how I made myself smaller, quieter, so Deborah could shine. When we finally started dating, years later, it felt less like a beginning and more like the fulfillment of a promise I'd made to myself as a child, that I would hold on, no matter what. The wedding was small, attended by friends and family who had seen us through heartbreak and healing. My mother cried through the ceremony, whispering prayers for our happiness. Deborah's sister, Hannah, arrived late and hungover, but Deborah only laughed, embracing her like nothing could break the bond between them. For years, I held on to the idea that love and loyalty were unbreakable. That if you tried hard enough, if you loved fiercely enough, nothing could pull you apart. I didn't see the cracks forming. I mistook silence for stability, distance for devotion. Now, as I stand in the echoing quiet of a house that no longer feels like home, I can see the truth I'd refused to face for so long. Loyalty is only as strong as the person willing to return it. And sometimes, the hardest thing isn't holding on, it's knowing when to let go. But that realization didn't come all at once. It came in pieces, in quiet moments, in the spaces between arguments and apologies. And as I stared down at Deborah's signature on those divorce papers, I realized that the lessons of my childhood had led me here, not because I was wrong to believe in loyalty, but because I'd never learned how to stop giving it away to people who didn't know how to stay. Falling in love with Deborah felt, at first, like finally finding a harbor after years spent adrift. She was the kind of person who commanded a room without trying, her presence a subtle current you found yourself following. I admired how she never apologized for wanting more, for hungering after things I'd only ever let myself dream about in secret. We started quietly, as most complicated things do. A friendship, warm and effortless. She introduced me to a world I had only watched from a distance: wine bars with soft jazz in the background, last-minute road trips to the coast, art galleries where she would stand in front of a painting for 10 minutes, searching for what it was trying to say. I loved watching her inhabit her life with a confidence I envied. On our first real date, she wore a dress the color of late summer roses and let me see the nervousness behind her bravado. "Don't get used to this," she joked as she tucked a stray hair behind her ear. "I'm not always this put together." I wanted to tell her she didn't need to be, but I didn't. Instead, I let her set the tone, let her be the sun around which I quietly orbited. There was comfort in letting someone else lead, in believing they knew the way forward. In the early days, we were deliriously happy. Everything felt new, electric. She brought me flowers for no reason, and left notes on the bathroom mirror. I, in turn, gave her the kind of loyalty that runs deep and silent, remembering her favorite meals, fixing the lamp by her bedside, listening late into the night when her work left her raw and restless. But beneath the laughter and shared mornings, there was a current of uncertainty, something we both felt but never named. Deborah needed freedom, a sense of possibility. I needed reassurance, roots. She craved adventure and reinvention, and I clung to tradition and familiarity. For a while, these differences felt like the harmless quirks of two people learning each other's shape. Looking back, I see the cracks forming even then. It was little things. How she would glance over my shoulder in a crowded room, always searching, scanning. The way she would change the subject when I brought up the future, children, houses, growing old together. "Let's just see where things go," she would say, smiling, but her eyes were already distant. Her career began to take off. Long hours at the office, business trips that bled into weekends. She was magnetic, ambitious, and people gravitated toward her. I found myself shrinking, unsure how to hold her attention when the world seemed determined to claim it for itself. I tried to adapt. I told myself that loving someone meant accepting all their contradictions, even the ones that left you lonely. When she came home late, smelling of expensive perfume and exhaustion, I made her tea and listened as she recounted stories about colleagues and clients I'd never meet. Sometimes she would reach for my hand in the dark, fingers entwined, as if anchoring herself for a moment before drifting away again. The first real fight was over nothing, a missed dinner, a forgotten text. But beneath it simmered all the unsaid things. Her resentment at my need for closeness, my fear that I was never enough to keep her still. We apologized, made up, but the fault lines grew deeper. Our silences became heavier, stretched out over days. I began to notice how she measured me against some invisible standard, how she compared me to the world she was chasing. She never said it outright, but I felt it, the unspoken disappointment. I was too careful, too content, too rooted. She was always reaching for something I couldn't give. And then there was Hannah. Deborah's sister was her opposite in almost every way, impulsive, chaotic, full of wild stories and bruised knuckles. She crashed into our lives unpredictably, sometimes in crisis, sometimes in celebration. At first, I saw her as a complication, a reminder of everything Deborah had outgrown. But Hannah saw me, in ways Deborah never had. She listened without judgment, made me laugh when I felt invisible. There was no comparison, no agenda. Just an ease I hadn't realized I was missing. I dismissed the closeness as accidental, the product of shared loneliness. But somewhere inside, I felt a shift, a small, guilty hope that maybe I wasn't the problem, that maybe I deserved to be seen. Deborah noticed, of course. She noticed everything. But instead of jealousy, there was relief. She encouraged the friendship, almost as if she wanted to transfer a part of her own burden. In hindsight, I think she sensed the growing distance between us and wanted to soften its edges. Or maybe she was already imagining a life beyond ours. Still, I stayed. I stayed because I believed love was persistence, because my mother had taught me to hold on, because letting go felt like a failure too heavy to bear. For a long time, I tried to ignore the tension, to believe that what we had was enough. But love, when it's only a memory, cannot anchor anyone. The real Deborah, the one who made me feel both adored and unseen, was slowly disappearing into the person she wanted to become. And I, so desperate not to lose her, lost myself instead. It took me years to see the truth, that sometimes, loving someone means letting them go. And sometimes, what we mistake for loyalty is just fear of being left behind. It happened in the soft, blue hours just after dusk, a time when the city softened at the edges and everything felt suspended, neither day nor night. I was running late, arms full of groceries, rehearsing small, ordinary apologies for being late. The apartment was quiet, just as I'd left it, but there was an unfamiliar hum in the air. A jacket, Hannah's, lay slung over the back of the sofa. I called Deborah's name, then Hannah's, expecting laughter from the kitchen, the low music of their voices blending, the familiar chaos they brought into my life. Instead, the only sound was my own heartbeat, suddenly much too loud. I set down the bags and moved toward the bedroom, the door half closed, light spilling into the hallway like a secret. It was the laughter that struck me first. Not the forced, brittle laughter I'd grown used to with Deborah, but something easy and intimate, a sound I hadn't heard from her in months. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself to leave, to go back outside, to give them privacy, because sisters shared everything, because there was nothing to fear, because trust was a choice I'd always made. But I hesitated. Inside, they were sitting close together on the edge of the bed, knees touching. Deborah's hand was on Hannah's, and there was a gravity between them, a tenderness that had been missing from my life for so long I'd forgotten how to name it. Their heads were bowed, foreheads almost touching, as if they were exchanging confessions too fragile for words. They didn't see me. For a moment, I could have left, let them have their secret. But I stood there, rooted, unable to look away. Then Deborah looked up, and our eyes met. For a second, she didn't move. Didn't even flinch, as if this was all perfectly ordinary, as if she expected me to understand. Hannah turned, saw me, and in her face was something between pity and guilt, but no surprise. I realized, in that instant, that this had been happening for longer than I'd wanted to believe. I waited for the anger to come. I waited for the shouting, the accusation. But what filled me instead was a quiet, aching disappointment, an emptiness so complete it was almost a relief. The betrayal was not just the physical closeness, not just the secrecy, but the ease of it, the way they'd let me become invisible in my own home. Deborah stood, moving between me and Hannah, her expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," she said, but it sounded practiced, as if she'd said it 1,000 times already. "I didn't want you to find out like this." "Find out what?" My voice was steady, even as my hands shook. "That we're together. That we've been, together." She glanced at Hannah, her face softening in a way it never did for me. "I didn't plan this. It just happened." I looked at Hannah, hoping for denial, for some sign that this was a misunderstanding, a momentary lapse. But she only met my gaze and nodded, her eyes rimmed red. "How long?" I asked. Hannah's voice was almost a whisper. "Months." The word hung in the air, heavy and final. I searched for evidence of manipulation, memories flickered by late-night texts, sudden absences, inside jokes that left me excluded, the way Deborah had stopped touching me, stopped seeing me. I blamed myself for the distance, convinced myself I was too much or not enough. I realized now that the narrative had always been written without me. What was I to you? I asked neither of them in particular. Deborah looked at her feet. You were. Hannah interrupted softly. You were good to us. You always tried to make things right. That was the wound that hurt most, not the infidelity, not even the loss, but the knowledge that my loyalty had become a convenience. That I'd been cast as the caretaker, the safe place, the one who'd hold the center while they chased what they truly wanted. I didn't cry. There was no dramatic collapse, no desperate pleading. Just the numb certainty that something inside me had closed for good. I saw the story from the outside, a person who loved too hard, who forgave too easily, who missed all the signs because they trusted too deeply. The silence stretched, broken only by the ticking of the old clock in the hallway. I wish I could hate you, I said, my voice thin. It would be easier if I could. Deborah finally met my eyes. I wish you could, too. There was nothing left to say. I walked past them, through the living room where Hannah's jacket waited for her, through the kitchen where the groceries sat forgotten. I stepped out into the night, the city lights blurred by the tears I refused to let fall. Outside, the air was cool, the world unchanged by the end of mine. I walked until my feet hurt, replaying every moment, every kindness that had turned into an excuse, every promise that had evaporated. The pain was real, but underneath it was a strange, hollow clarity, the understanding that betrayal is never as simple as it seems, and that sometimes love fails not because of malice, but because of needs we never dared to voice. I thought I'd feel rage, but all I felt was the echo of a question I'd carried since childhood: what do you do when the people you trust most teach you to doubt yourself? I didn't have an answer, not yet. All I had was the truth, cold and absolute. I was not the center of anyone's story but my own. And now, at last, I was free to write it. The night after I walked out was colder than any I could remember. I stayed in a small hotel on the other side of town, in a room with walls the color of old paper and a bed that creaked with every shift of weight. I stared at the ceiling for hours, numbness settling in my limbs, thinking about all the ways I could respond, grand gestures, confrontations, accusations screamed into the void. But none of it called to me. I kept coming back to silence. In silence, I had always found myself, even as a child, waiting for my mother to come home, counting the spaces between her footsteps and the way she'd sigh into the night. Silence was my inheritance, but now it felt different, more like armor than absence. I didn't go back for days. I ignored Deborah's texts, short, clipped apologies, requests for closure, for understanding, as if the past could be boxed up and put away. I didn't answer Hannah, either. I told myself I needed time, space to think, to breathe, but I knew the truth: I needed them to feel the absence of me. The world didn't stop. The sun rose, the city thrummed with its usual routines. I went to work, did what was required of me, but it was as if I were moving through water, everything muffled, distant. There was an odd clarity in the detachment. My thoughts sharpened. For the first time in years, I could hear my own voice over the din of trying to keep someone else happy. I saw a therapist. I'd never gone before, had always thought myself strong enough to handle my own pain. But something in me wanted a witness, wanted someone to confirm I wasn't crazy for hurting the way I did. I told her the story, and she listened, quietly, until I reached the part where I confessed I didn't know if I was more hurt by the betrayal or by how long I'd lied to myself about it. She nodded, and her words landed gently but firmly: you can forgive people without allowing them to stay. Sometimes, the greatest act of self-respect is refusing to explain yourself to those who have already shown you they cannot listen. That idea grew inside me, slow and steady. I realized that I didn't want a scene. I didn't want to scream or demand apologies that would only ring hollow. I wanted to take my life back, piece by piece, in ways that mattered to me. After a week, I returned to the apartment. I waited until I knew Deborah would be at work and Hannah out of sight. The place was cleaner than I'd ever seen it, as if they'd tried to scrub away the evidence of what had happened. But it was still my home, and I moved through it methodically, gathering the parts of myself I'd left behind. I packed slowly, books I'd collected, photographs from better days, my old battered journal with my mother's handwriting on the first page. I found a box of Deborah's things, letters I'd written her, little gifts she'd never used. For a moment, I considered throwing them out, setting fire to the whole memory. But then I packed them neatly, left them on the bed, and scrawled a single note. "You will not find me where you left me." No signature. I wanted her to know that I had left by choice, not because she pushed me away, but because I had chosen myself. Before I left, I sat in our living room one last time, breathing in the silence. There was a freedom in it, a sense that, finally, I owed nothing to anyone but myself. The legal side was easier than I'd expected. Deborah had already signed the divorce papers. I signed them too, with a steady hand, sealing the end with my own name, no hesitation, no looking back. My lawyer remarked how quick and clean it was. I thought about telling her that the hardest endings are always silent, but I only nodded, grateful for the efficiency. But there was still Hannah. I found her one afternoon, sitting on the steps outside her apartment, cigarette trembling between her fingers. She looked up, startled, as if she hadn't expected to ever see me again. "I'm sorry," she said, words tumbling out. "I didn't mean for any of this." I sat beside her. The street was busy, the world passing us by in indifferent waves. "I know," I said, and I meant it. "You were both searching for something I couldn't give. I hope you find it." She stared at me, eyes wide, searching for accusation or bitterness. There was none. I had let it go, or at least, I was trying to. I stood and offered her a hand, just once, just enough to say goodbye, and walked away without looking back. My revenge, I realized, was not in making them suffer, but in refusing to be a part of the pattern anymore. In not giving them the satisfaction of my pain, my outrage. In letting them wonder how I could simply walk away when for so long I had been the one who stayed. But there was one last piece, something I hadn't expected. A month after leaving, I ran into Hannah at a coffee shop. She was with a friend, laughter brittle around the edges. She saw me, and for a moment, our eyes met. I nodded politely and moved to leave, but she followed me outside. "Are you really okay?" she asked, hesitant, as if bracing for the anger I'd never shown. I thought about lying, about offering a polished, easy answer. But I was tired of pretending. "No," I said honestly. "But I will be." She nodded, understanding flickering in her expression. "I hope so." As I turned to go, she called after me. "You know, Deborah misses you." I smiled, not unkindly. "Maybe. But she never really knew me." That was the last time I saw either of them. I made a rule for myself, not out of spite, but out of kindness: no more contact, no more explanations. My life, for once, was my own. The months that followed were quiet but full. I threw myself into work, into friendships I'd neglected, into evenings alone where I learned how to be content in my own company. I started volunteering on weekends, finding solace in being useful to people who didn't know my story. I began to write again, pages and pages of thoughts and memories, not to share with anyone, but to reclaim the narrative I'd lost. Each word was a small act of defiance, a way of telling myself that my life had value beyond what others gave it. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about Deborah and Hannah. I wondered if they found what they were looking for in each other. I hoped they did. The old anger flared up now and then, but it never lasted. There was too much peace in the life I was building. One evening, sorting through old boxes, I found a photograph, me, Deborah, and Hannah, arms around each other, laughing at something just out of frame. I stared at it for a long time, feeling the sharp ache of nostalgia. But I didn't cry. I slipped the photograph into a drawer and shut it gently. My revenge, I realized, was simple. I had survived. I had refused to be destroyed by their choices. I had loved, and I had lost, and I had rebuilt. In the end, the greatest satisfaction was in knowing that I could walk away with my dignity intact, my silence unbroken, and the promise to myself finally kept. I would never again be the one who held on after it was time to let go. And that, I discovered, was enough. I am different now. The change isn't something anyone would notice from the outside, no drastic haircuts, no sudden reinvention. But the shift runs deep, a quiet settling of old wounds that I once believed would never close. If I touch the places where it hurts, I find only faint scars, the memory of pain rather than its sharp edge. In the months since I left, life has taken on a gentle rhythm. I wake alone, and instead of feeling the hollow absence of another body, I feel a kind of relief. There is room to stretch, to breathe, to hear my own thoughts. I've learned to cook for one, to find pleasure in silence, to fill evenings with books and music rather than anxious waiting. Sometimes I even laugh aloud, startled by how easily joy can sneak in once grief has loosened its grip. There are still moments, unexpected, sometimes bittersweet, when memory catches me off guard. The smell of rain on pavement, the flicker of gold light through a window, a line from a poem Deborah once read aloud. For a breath, I am back in that old life, feeling the ache of what might have been. But I no longer linger there. I let the memory come and go, like the weather. I remind myself that missing what was lost does not mean I want it back. Mostly, what remains is a quieter kind of knowledge. I understand now that loyalty is a gift, not a debt. That love cannot be kept alive by willpower alone. I have stopped blaming myself for what happened. I see, with new clarity, how I gave and gave, hoping it would be enough for someone else to stay. I see how I mistook persistence for strength, how I made myself small for fear of being left behind. Now, I measure strength differently. Not by how much I can endure, but by how gently I can treat myself when everything falls apart. I have learned to forgive, not for their sake, but for mine. To let go of anger before it calcifies into bitterness. To walk away from what does not nourish me, even when every instinct tells me to hold on. Sometimes friends ask if I'm angry still, or if I ever want revenge. I tell them the truth, the best revenge is a life that belongs to me. There is a freedom in choosing myself, in refusing to be an afterthought in my own story. The person I was, the one who stayed, who forgave too easily, is not gone. They are changed, wiser, tempered by experience but not made hard by it. I look at the world now with softer eyes. I am not naive, I know what people are capable of, how easily trust can fracture. But I haven't lost faith in love, only in the myth that it can survive on loyalty alone. If love comes again, I will greet it as an equal, not as a supplicant. I will give, but not at the cost of myself. In the end, what matters most is this: I have become my own anchor. My worth is not measured by who chooses me, or who leaves. I belong, finally, to myself. And that, I think, is the quiet miracle of surviving heartbreak. Not that we are unscathed, but that we learn, in the aftermath, how to cherish the self we fought so hard to reclaim.